Indie horror has gone through many phases throughout the years, often using certain games as landmark moments or shifts in these phases. One of the most influential moments in the indie games period was probably the release of the original Slender game, loosely based on the Marble Hornets video series. This game set the groundwork for how horror would be marketed in the online space, with a huge amount of content creators giving their reactions and releasing their playthroughs of this game to the masses, with large amounts of views being pulled in, and kickstarting the careers of many game developers and YouTubers. A lot of the games around this time would follow suit with the format that Slender took, and we got a lot of very minimal and kind of messy bite-sized exploration-based horror games, with a couple of standouts here and there. Nothing was really evolving the scene though for a couple of years, and the oversaturation of said market was resulting in a lot of trash on both the YouTube and gaming market.
And as the protagonist courageously explored the dark yet mystifying chambers of the tunnel, it struck him. It was not just any tunnel he was expeditiously running through, but a long-ass tunnel. Finally, the fucking end. Finally, the end of the tunnel. Finally. The fuck is this thing? Oh, it's looking for a fight. Alright, I'll fight circles around you. Let's tango.
Little did the indie horror gaming sphere know, in 2013, a little game would shake up the landscape of horror, both indie and beyond, for years to come. That game would be the developer-admitted abysmal critical failure named Chipper & Sons, created by indie developer Scott Cawthon. This game famously was lambasted by reviewers, most notably critic Jim Sterling, for its unintentionally creepy and soulless art style, with many throwing comparisons to the uncanny animatronics from the Chuck E. Cheese and Rockefeller explosion.
Terrifying. Utterly What in the name of Jesus Saint McFuck? You may notice the dead, terrifying, soulless eyes of the background characters. That's a signature of Chip and whatever the fuck it was called, Chipper and Sons. Look at them, they're just... I like to think that Chipper here, the little fellow, is just forcing these other beavers to chop forever against their will. They want to die. They know they should die.
These criticisms and reviews would put Cawthon into a bit of a mental low, with him even considering dropping game development altogether. This mental low would be the spark the struggling developer would need though, and eventually he would flip a lot of the criticisms directed towards Chipper on their heads, resulting in one of the most successful horror franchises of all time, Five Nights at Freddy's. In this series, I will be analyzing the entirety of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, ranging from the original games developed by Scott Cawthon to the 3 different books expanding on both existing and original canon, eventually concluding with an analysis on the modern AAA titles. Along the way, we will be discussing, explaining, and critiquing the story surrounding these pieces of media, reliving the lead up to each release, and exploring the gameplay and information from each entry. Get strapped in for my most ambitious video series yet, because this is bound to be an interesting one. Hello and welcome everyone, my name is Sleep, and welcome to my analysis of Five Nights at Freddy's. Enjoy! Five Nights at Freddy's, released in 2014, is a resource management-based horror game in which you take the role of a night shift security guard at a Chuck E. Cheese-like pizzeria with a primary goal of surviving the night until 6 a.m. while avoiding the horrific grasp of various haunted animatronics. The game, in terms of gameplay, has you sitting down in the middle of an office with a set of 2 doors and lights on your left and right side, along with a tablet to view various preset camera angles throughout the pizzeria. There are 4 different animatronics you'll be keeping track of throughout the pizzeria, each behaving in their own distinct way. Essentially, you're trying to ward off each animatronic from reaching the inside of your office while managing your power supply and responding to animatronic movement correctly by hitting the door buttons on in your office. The light switch buttons above said door buttons serve as these tools to allow you to see the animatronics Bonnie and Chica in your camera's blind spot outside your door, enabling you to close said doors at a better time without spending as much power. The power supply is the main resource you'll be constantly juggling throughout the various nights, and on a game design level serves as a way to prevent players from just closing both of the doors for the entire night or doing anything without that extra tension on them, which this game uses in a genius way to make the player experience much more horrifying, which works super well for an indie horror game. Personally speaking though, the game excels in the horror aspect extremely well in its use of audio and visual trickery in its cameras and ambience. This all complements the main animatronic designs of Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Freddy, who have this subtlety to them that makes them extremely appealing to children outside of a horror setting, while also having this horrific soulless edge to them and dark, damp camera systems. The ambient drones of your fan in your office, along with the randomized childlike pained moans or shuffling around and footsteps you hear around you when you are looking through your cameras, put you in this uneasy atmosphere that makes it feel like something is constantly watching you. The animatronics, in terms of how they interact with the cameras in the pizzeria, add to this feeling of being put on edge too, with stuff like a room full of spare heads sometimes trying to look at you directly. This with them almost watching you directly through their cameras in unison with the animatronic with the room. It makes you feel like the entire environment is working against you and like you're intruding on a cultish haunted hive mind. All this tension and horror alone works super well, but kind of gets undermined by the popular horror practice of jump scares. Essentially, when you die in this game by an animatronic gang inside of your room, you get rewarded with a soulless animatronic jumping at you with a loud scream, and honestly, this alone kind of removes a lot of the tension built up in a single jolt of adrenaline. It takes so much built up tension and atmospheric horror and throws it all out just for a simple quick reaction when you lose, which kinda sucks. The game benefited from it though in the long term, as it gave the larger reaction from content creators that people wanted to really see. That and the entertaining gameplay loop of seeing people fend off the animatronic AI while increasingly becoming more anxious and the viewer being paid off with either success of the night or jump scare made this really blow up on the YouTube sphere. Usually later into Let's Plays, it becomes more of an entertaining trial and error run of people developing strategies and overcoming nights, which has resulted in this cool replayability and mastery level to this game. I actually want to take a second to discuss the strategy of mastering this game because I think it's a really interesting deep journey I went through when trying to conquer this game. So essentially, to complete this game, you have to reach 6 AM on the main 5 nights, an additional 6th night, and when you're comfortable enough, an additional 7th night, with the animatronics being set on their maximum AI level of 20, making them more aggressive. There are 4 different animatronics in total that have unique AI paths they follow before they reach your office or progress that you should learn before attempting something like the aforementioned 420 mode. So let me try to boil down each one simply. Bonnie and Chica are easily the most simple animatronics to avoid and prevent getting into your office. Essentially, they will constantly progress through their set routes on various different cameras before they arrive at the set doorways. Bonnie will appear on your left door, and it is best to shut the door on when he appears on the previously mentioned blind spotlight, where he will remain there until either his AI resets or you open the door too early and open the camera, resulting in a game over. Chica acts the exact same way, but you can somewhat keep track of her through the noises made through her kitchen phase, with the biggest difference from Bonnie being that she appears on the right side. Foxy is a unique animatronic that is located in Pirate's Cove. Essentially, the thing that triggers him to progress through his various stages of movement leading to the eventual rush on your office is low camera usage. Your main goal with him is to look at cameras frequently to prevent him from constantly itching off the stage and rushing into your office. You can prevent him from entering your office by using the left door within a brief window, leading him to scratch your door, take some power, and reset his AI with a power penalty increasing by 6% after each subsequent charge. Essentially, your main goal is to try to have him leave as little as possible through extensive usage of your camera. It's actually a really common misconception that you specifically have to view Pirate Cove to prevent his progress, but you purely just have to use the cameras, which shouldn't be too hard with the existence of the next animatronic. Freddy works in a very strange way. Essentially, his AI does these checks every couple of seconds that allows him to progress. If your camera is not specifically on his when he's doing this AI check, he will begin a countdown and progress onto his next camera stage. Essentially, you want to be looking at him as much as possible on the cameras while also multitasking the other 3 animatronics. If he does make it into your office, and he does an AI check and succeeds, you will die no matter what, even if your doors are closed or open. There's definitely a big emphasis on the AI working with RNG, but if you take all this into consideration and apply it correctly, you could conquer most situations this game throws at you. That aside, we haven't exactly talked about every animatronic of this game yet, and this last one is pretty important to the series and would force me to talk about some lore. So let's talk about what this game has to offer in that lane. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 doesn't have too much lore alone to really gather much substance from. Most of the information given here is through our helpful phone guy, who is leaving some voice messages to help us get through the nights, and sometimes dropping some lore bits like the mention of an incident called the Bite of 87, in which an animatronic removes someone's frontal lobe.
So just be aware, the characters do tend to wander a bit. They're left in some kind of free roaming mode at night. Something about their servos locking up if they get turned off for too long. They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too. But then there was the Bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe.
Phone Guy himself, plot-wise, gets himself killed off on night 4, with him not really having much presence in any big events to our knowledge. The sinister backstory of the Freddy Fazbear pizza chain is somewhat drip-fed through these newspaper articles that may appear on the walls from time to time, discussing the murder of various children and their bodies being shoved into suits, resulting in mucus and smell coming from the animatronics. This all gives backstory to why the animatronics are behaving in the way they do, and explains the somewhat haunted and ghostly way the Golden Freddy animatronic appears, with it only showing up if you spot a certain poster in the cameras. If it shows up in your office and it jump scares you, it will crash your game. A lot about this animatronic is still very mysterious, and often speculated to this very day. Following the release of FNAF to the general public, it was soon picked up by some of the largest content creators in the world, most notably Markiplier, who sits at 101 million views on his first video covering this game. Scott Cawthon almost overnight became an indie game sensation because of this game, which would cause fan games and a shift in the way horror game designers would make their games. People wanted these colorful mascots for their horror games instead of these deformed and consistently unsettling creatures, which is a shift I'm kinda split on. Personal grudges with the state of indie horror aside, FNAF 1 would become one of the most popular and hot topics on YouTube, and soon Scott would start teasing a sequel to this title, promising new animatronics and new interesting gameplay ideas. Soon the trailer dropped for the sequel, and literally 3 months after the successful release of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, we were given the sequel, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 serves as one of the most ambitious sequels in the entire series, where Scott absolutely threw everything at the wall. The lore, amount of characters, Easter eggs, and gameplay was expanded upon in a way that laid the groundwork for the rest of the series to come.
She is such a bad bitch though. I will fuck the shit out of that robot, man. I'm not even...
The game promised with its trailer to absolutely flip what we knew about Five Nights at Freddy's on its head, with the removal of doors and a complete rework of the general gameplay loop to make it a more conceptual direction for the series. FNAF 2 came with the introduction of 11 animatronics that function all in their own way, creating a very chaotic yet thought out challenge that will push players to learn the patterns and the ways to defeat each attacking force. There are 3 different categories I'd like to split this cast of this game into when it comes to gameplay function, with those being the maskable attack animatronics, the puppet, and the Fox BB Squad. Let's delve into each category real quick in terms of function and break down what they do and how to survive them. In the largest and most prominent group is the maskable attack animatronics. This group consists of the withered Chica, Freddy, and Bonnie animatronics, along with Toy Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and the Mangle. These dudes will appear either in your left, right, or middle entrances to your office. In this game, you cannot just simply close the door on the animatronics here, because you do not have any doors to rely on. Here you instead combat the animatronics by putting on a Freddy mask and tricking their AI into thinking that everything is fine in the room and resetting them to restart their path to your office. Most of these animatronics will appear in your office before attacking with an audio cue, which gives you a small amount of time to switch to the mask. The only exception to this audio cue rule is Mangle, who makes a consistent radio noise throughout her appearances in the camera and vents. You want to mask her when she shows up on your vent rather than waiting for her to come in your office. If she makes it into your office, it basically becomes a countdown until she swoops down and bites your ass. This small exception aside, this is easily the least difficult category of animatronic to deal with. The puppet is a huge part of the gameplay that incentivizes players to not just hide in the mask for the entire game. The puppet is a special animatronic that will jump scare you mask on or off, and to prevent this you will have to wind up the music box on camera 11. It's actually pretty damn good game design, and micromanaging this along with the like 7 animatronics is pretty damn rough, and it gets even harder with the introduction of the next category of animatronic. These two serve the ultimate purpose of wanting to absolutely pipe your ass down. Foxy and BB are like Ricardo and Bubba in the prison showers. Essentially, Balloon Boy works very similarly to Mangle, where you slowly progress into your office, with him being evaded through the mask while he's in the vent. What makes him so hated and such an asshole is the fact that he steals your batteries, and if he succeeds in getting your office, essentially making you vulnerable to Foxy. Foxy is evaded by flashing your light in the middle hall. Not doing so will result in a jump scare from him, ending the game. When these two work together, you just get absolutely fucked over the most annoying asshole way possible, and that's why people absolutely despise Balloon Boy in particular. This gameplay loop of flashing the middle hall, winding the music box, and putting on the mask makes this one of the most chaotic shitfest gameplay experiences in the entire series, and while it can sometimes feel very tense, I feel like it loses a lot of that atmosphere and punch that made FNAF 1 so impactful in the horror department. The sheer chaos in the way this game is designed makes this one of my least favorite FNAF games to revisit, but while FNAF 2 falls flat on these areas personally, it excels in something that would later become extremely important for the series after this game, that being the lore. FNAF 2 introduced so much to the ongoing hidden plot of the FNAF series with a lot of interesting concepts and events that are still being speculated on to this very day. Most of this came from the now infamous hidden death minigames and hidden secret animatronics like the endoskeleton that shows up in the vents and puppet area, or the shadow animatronics. Let's elaborate on the death minigames though, because the implications of those are still affecting the series in current time. Essentially from this point forward in the FNAF series, we would be receiving most of our plot through these Atari/arcade style minigames where you do relatively simple tasks, only for you to get jump scared by something, or find a secret that ties into what little lore we know about from FNAF 1, like the child murders and such. In the famous Take Cake to the Children minigame, we are introduced to a figure and event that would basically kickstart most of the stuff that happens in the FNAF franchise. This being our child murderer, dubbed the Purple Guy by the fans, killing a child outside of an unknown restaurant in a drive-by style attack. In another minigame dubbed Give Gifts, Give Life, you play as the puppet and go to what seems to be child corpses, whereby the name implies you give these corpses the gift of life by seemingly stuffing them inside of animatronic suits. In this minigame where you play as Foxy, you are instructed to run to another room over and over again to various children celebrating. In a final loop, you see the Purple Guy outside of Pirate Cove, only to see a room full of corpses. In a final minigame, dubbed by the fans the Save Them minigame due to the robotic voice that plays throughout it, you follow the puppet through a seemingly rundown version of a pizza place with corpses spread all over the place. The game will randomly end with there seemingly not being any goal. There's actually a secret within this minigame where you randomly may encounter the Purple Guy as he rushes towards you, shutting off the minigame. Pair this up with the game being a prequel and the phone guy dropping lore bits about a place called Fredbear's Family Diner here along with the incident towards the end of the game, and boom, there's a lot of stuff to speculate and theorize about here in terms of lore relevance. This all really helped this game stay in the general consciousness for a lot longer, and resulted in discussion for the following months. This speculation would further be fueled by a brand new teaser on Scott Cawthon's website, resulting in the build-up to what we know as FNAF 3, and soon the series would enter its first real peak in terms of popularity, with the release of the third game's trailer. FNAF 3 is a really interesting game in the franchise for a couple of reasons. One of its biggest being the approach Scott had going into the entire mindset of this game's development. FNAF 3 is kind of the antithesis of what FNAF 2 as a whole was in terms of gameplay concept, where instead of trying to go batshit insane with the amount of animatronics or like have 40 different mechanics to keep track of, Scott wanted a more one-on-one traditional monster approach. Yep, that means in this game, there really is only one threat and one threat alone in terms of things in the location out there to kill you, this being the now somewhat iconic animatronic, Springtrap. Springtrap is this rotten, old, and human animatronic with possibly one of Scott's most ambitious and coolest ideas behind it. You see, this isn't just any normal-ass animatronic hunting you down, but instead, this thing has this very visible human corpse inside of it, being easily spotted in these rare screens that sometimes pop up when you boot up the game. I absolutely adore the way this thing was designed, with these fleshy intestines just dripping out the metal endoskeleton's feet onto the bottom, the crushed human eye almost trapped inside of this robotic socket that is holding it in place, and the horrific grin this thing has on its face constantly. He might honestly be one of the best modern horror creature designs I've seen in the modern age. I actually really like a lot of what FNAF 3 has to offer on a presentation level, with there being a lot of interesting designs and a really cool attention to detail in the unique environment. This game takes place within a horror attraction instead of the traditional active Freddy's pizzeria, which lends itself well to some cool rooms with some cool set pieces like the Bonnie Light hallway, or the room filled with these shells and masks of animatronics the general public was accustomed to. The environment itself might be one of the biggest mechanics new players will have to come to terms with in terms of gameplay, along with the camera system being old and decrepit, along with you now having to manage stuff like sealing off vents and preventing these old buggy systems from shutting down while distracting a hard to spot spring trap with Balloon Boy voice lines throughout the horror attraction. It's a really complex system you're dealing with here just to back off one animatronic from reaching your office. It only gets harder to deal with when you have stuff to worry about like the phantoms. The phantoms are these hallucinations that happen throughout the night that take the shape of various burned and gross looking versions of previously existing FNAF animatronics. They can randomly appear or will sometimes just show up if you overuse certain mechanics. Each one, when their jump scare mechanic is triggered, will affect the player and their systems, often forcing them to reboot and waste time on something else other than a Springtrap, thus giving the opportunity for him to get away and kill the player. The problem with these dudes though, in terms of being a threat, is the fact that you can easily avoid them by either clicking off different cameras or just not looking a certain way for a little bit. All of this kind of makes FNAF 3, in my opinion, one of the easiest and most boring gameplay loops in the entire series. Keep in mind, there's some genuinely good atmosphere here though that really works in this game's favor. I for one really enjoyed the fact that this game has so many little atmospheric visual details, ranging from the posters on the wall from old Freddy's locations to the entire box of empty animatronic shells that are in your office. This is all just elevated in the atmosphere department with the way sound was handled in this game from a horror setting standpoint. The audio design is very empty, with a lot of audio drones and loose sounds here and there that make this place feel empty in this tense and unsettling way. The monsters that fill this space are dark and somewhat hard to make out fully, which gives them this room for your imagination to try and understand the details in. Mix that with the slow intensity building from the elongated time spent on these loading reboot screens, which all just adds up for the smooth yet almost on-edge experience that gives the game probably one of the best atmospheres in the series since FNAF 1. But while I think this is a really good strength of this game, where I think this game really peaks is the unraveling story and secrets it has to offer. At the end of every night, you get thrown into these pixelated gameplay segments, a lot like FNAF 2 with its death minigames, where you get to explore this really rundown and abandoned Freddy's locations as 4 different animatronics. Throughout this small labyrinth with weird codes or numbers in its halls, you are led by a shadowy Freddy to this corner of this pizza place that the animatronics seem to struggle to get into, with various errors coming up. The minigame concludes once you back off from trying to enter the room, only to get brutally attacked and torn apart by the famous purple guy. This formula repeats 4 times until you beat Night 5, where in a twist of expectations, you play as a series representation of a dead child, with you this time going into the room the Shadow Freddy was trying to lure you into. In a grand reveal, you are joined by 4 other dead kid spirits, and you basically scare the shit out of the mysterious purple guy by chasing him around the room. You do this until he decides to be a dumbass and puts on the old spring Bonnie suit in the room, resulting in him suffering from a death due to something early established to be called a spring lock failure, and being eternally trapped in that suit. This moment is a pretty cool little point of realization for the player, which basically recontextualizes the Springtrap animatronic in a way where he comes off as this kind of cool slasher monster. But this finale just gets a lot more confusing, with you most likely being greeted by the bad ending screen. Yes, that's right, the series is now dealing with multiple endings. Getting the good ending in this game is one of the coolest and most how the fuck would you ever figure that out moments I've ever experienced in a game, and honestly, I think it's really cool. Scott Cawthon put in some really out there random things you need to interact with and connect in a way that really reminds me of something like a high quality ARG. Let's go step by step so you guys can understand why I find this entire process to be so out there. So, starting on the second night of the game, you will begin to have to start interacting with environments on your cameras and in your office from night to night, hoping to unlock parts of these hidden mini-games. On night 2, what you want to do is go over to camera 8 on your monitor and double click on this random ass balloon poster on the wall. This will open up a minigame in which you have to collect these balloons in this room. Instead of doing literally the only goal of this minigame, you'll have to do some really game dev-ish Metroid moment bullshit and clip out of the wall on your upper left. Yes, we are literally getting to this level of out there bullshit. Once you clip out and fall out of bounds enough to reach the floor, go to your right. After passing a weird crying balloon boy room, presumably the result of the amount of shit he got online from FNAF 2, you have to find a room with a color shifting balloon. Collect the balloon and head back to your cameras on your office and head over to camera 7. This time you'll be interacting with the 4 buttons on the arcade cabinet and inputting the top left, bottom bottom right buttons in that order. Some real Konami bullshit, huh? Moving on, this time, you are now the gender debate topic of 2014, Mangle, and this time, you'll need to collect all of your parts and clip out of the wall to your right above the exit. The problem being this green-shirted furry porn artist trying to catch you and kick you out of the minigame. If you manage to succeed, you will find yourself in front of another crying shadowy figure. Since you did the Balloon Boy minigame, you'll be able to hop on these balloons here and parkour yourself up to this cake. Once you are booted back to the office, you will need to progress to night 3. Once in night 3, you'll have to go on a cupcake hunt quest around cameras 2, 3, 4, and 6, resulting in you finding yourself in a minigame as a pixelated Chica. This time, you go down this little path here and hop up this wall to your left. Here you can hop on these balloons and give this cake to this crying child. That is all for this night, so we're gonna again move on to night 4. On night 4, you're gonna have to do some of the most cryptic ass shit I've ever seen in a video game. On this night, you will have to input, like a number pad, the code 39524 into the fucking wall. Yes, I shit you not, this is the level of cryptic bullshit this game pulls. In this minigame, you're Fredbear, and this time you have to clip out of the room, so you have to do a stage dive with your fat bear ass into the crowd of children, where God will pluck you out of the fucking back rooms, and you will have to loop yourself into the secret room to give this kid some cake. Now that you're back in the office, you're going to need to navigate over to camera 8 and repeat the Balloon Boy clipping process. This time, you'll land on balloons and will parkour over to another kid similar to the Mangle minigame. After this, you are free to progress to night 5. On this night, there will be a Shadow Bonnie figure on your desk. Clicking on it will result in another minigame. This one, you could basically flip through various minigames in an attempt to reach a kid out of bounds in one of the screens. Once you give the kid the cake, go over to camera 3 and you will see a puppet poster. In this minigame, titled The Happiest Day, you will walk over to the kid alone by a table and give the last cake, freeing all of the masked children from their animatronic bodies. Now that you did all of these steps, you should be able to get a screen similar to the bad ending, but with the main difference being that the lights in the animatronics heads are no longer lighting up. By doing this, you have unlocked all the additional content in the extras menu, including the hardest night and a jump scare menu. And yes, for all of these games, I'm putting myself through every single challenge they have to offer, and I mean every single one. Overall, FNAF 3, while being one of the easiest games in the series, definitely has some of the coolest stuff to offer on a lore and secret level. The systems were unique, and the story here seemingly came to a close. But with hindsight in mind, we know FNAF as a series did not end here. So let's see what exactly Scott did with FNAF in the next entry, horribly titled, Five Nights at Freddy's 4, The Final Chapter. FNAF 4 is probably among the top 3 games for me in this series in every department except story and secrets. The game immediately on its reveal hit us with some of the best horror imagery I've seen the series pull off. This Freddy design has this horrific, evil, and dry look to him with these empty-looking eyes. The little mini Freddys you see in his chest give off this intestine-ripping puppet look to them that gives me flashbacks to this really badly made scene in the movie Tales from the Hood, which gave me this phobia of things like this eating and tearing apart something from the inside. In hindsight, this scene hasn't aged too well, but its impact on my little underdeveloped child brain is still there. Back to FNAF 4 though, this game continued the pace with back-to-back reveals of these horrific redesigns of the iconic 4 FNAF 1 animatronics everyone had gone to know and love. So with that, everyone was ready for what was bound to be one of the most genuinely terrifying games in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, in terms of animatronic design at least. Back that up with the strange but enticing setting of a child's room, and yeah, people were excited. Getting into the game itself greets you with a minigame establishing a night-to-night narrative around this kid in his house, akin to how things were done in FNAF 3. This time you were playing as this crying child being tortured by his brother throughout his house in various locations. minigames. At the end of every night, you'll be greeted by one of these minigames with them constantly talking about a party and counting down to something. On top of these minigames, you are also greeted by another minigame, but in a style unlike anything else in the series. Here you are plucked into a hallway with a countdown, an X on the floor, and a horrific plush spring Bonnie on a chair. In this minigame, you are forced to try and flash your light right on time so that the doll will appear on the X. The problem being that you only have a limited amount of time to do so, and if he gets close to you, you are dead. The benefit of winning is that you essentially get to skip 2 hours of the next traditional FNAF night. This game can really help you win back-to-back nights if you know what sound cues to listen in for to get the most consistent plush trap minigame wins. Speaking of the traditional FNAF nights, let's talk about the core of this game. FNAF 4 is very similar to FNAF 1, but with a big emphasis on sound. Nightmare Bonnie and Chica are set up to go down the exact same hallways, with Nightmare Freddy and Nightmare Foxy having their own systems. Let's talk about how the three groups work from a gameplay standpoint and how to counter them. Nightmare Bonnie and Chica will appear down at the end of their respective hall, by your door, or will jump scare you inside of your room. If you catch them at the end of the hallway with your light, you will scare them off, thus delaying their other phases. The big phase to pay attention to, though, is the door phase. These two will appear at your door and will jump scare you if you turn on your light while they are still there. The way you're able to know if they are right in front of you or not is by the breathing sound they make. If you catch their heavy breathing, you shut the door until you get a cue allowing you to deal with the other animatronics. If you mishear the cue and move on, or don't even engage the animatronics at the door, they will appear in your room, thus giving you a jump scare. These two have some of the most tense and scary gameplay of the entire series in my opinion, for the sheer concept of having to basically come face to face with a creature in the dark that you cannot see out of sheer fear of death, and the horrific design when they do get you just makes this all the better. Freddy in FNAF 4 works in a way somewhat akin to the puppet in FNAF 2, but in my opinion is a lot better designed. Instead of winding up the music box, the timer ticking down is these three Freddys, dubbed Freddles by the community around this series. These three will show up and pile up until they reach a phase where Nightmare Freddy appears. What you want to do to prevent all three of them from showing up is by checking on your bed from time to time and flashing your light on them to scare them away. Often, when they start appearing on your bed, you can somewhat hear their sounds faintly in other parts of the room, giving you that extra bit of time you need to go and deal with other stuff before going to your bed and clearing them. I like this little bit of sound design too, because often in later nights, you'll be holding that door shut in your room with Bonnie and Chica, with this added tension of the sound of the Freddles getting louder and louder, inflicting that fear of an attack from Freddy. Nightmare Foxy is a rather strange animatronic who kind of serves as a mix of the other three animatronics whose mere existence in a gameplay loop is a punishment. Let me explain. So essentially, Nightmare Foxy most prominently becomes active on the second night of the game, with him scurrying back and forth between your left and right halls at the beginning of the night. He has three different phases, with two of which being preventable. In the scurrying phase, he works similarly to Bonnie and Chica, where you want to try and flash him at the end of the hall to delay him progressing further in. The main difference between him and the other two, though, is he does not have a door phase and he moves back and forth between halls pretty damn fast. You want to prevent him from making it inside of your room for as long as possible, so he isn't as prevalent and annoying to deal with for the rest of the night. Sometimes the RNG just sucks though on your end, and he makes it in. If he does make it into your room, he will begin his closet phase, which is signaled to the player through the closet door creaking. During this phase, he basically becomes another puppet animatronic like Freddy, with his main difference being that instead of the light preventing him from progressing, you have to close the doors, similar to Bonnie and Chica. This phase can absolutely fuck you over if you are just getting railed by the other two, and will most likely cause death if the Freddles have bad RNG. I would strongly recommend you try and hold him back for as long as possible during the scurrying phase because of this. Altogether, this makes for a genuinely great gameplay cycle that keeps tension consistently up, in a way where the jump scares and suspense still somewhat get me years after its release. That, on top of the amazing atmosphere and sound design of the distant dogs barking, and the tense chiming of the grandfather clock bells, establishes this level of genuine horror I don't think the series has been able to reach outside of this game. But we are not quite done with this segment on the gameplay yet, because there is a sudden shift in the game on night 5 that serves as a horrific curveball and challenge for the player. Nightmare Fredbear is an animatronic that appears on the 5th night of this game and serves as this night's one and only challenge. This monstrosity is the encapsulation of absolutely everything you have learned in this game getting flipped. He will appear in all the spots you would normally expect other animatronics to be, and functions in a completely different way. In the hallway, he functions like a mix of Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica, with him rushing from door to door with some fast footsteps. What you want to do is run to where he is in the halls and immediately close the door until he runs to the other door or goes into a different system for a cycle. If you hear him running, he will be in the halls. If you hear him laughing, he will be either on your bed or inside of the closet. In the closet, you want to slam that door shut until you hear him either scurry off or laugh. With the bed, he appears as a head on your bed, and you just gotta spam click until he has gone into another system. The amount of panic and absolute horror creating an animatronic like this and throwing him into the game randomly is amazing, and honestly makes for one of the coolest and most horrific moments in the series. This game doesn't stop subverting expectations this night though, as the final cutscene is one that has left its impact on both the series and internet culture as a whole. In the minigame cutscene for the 5th night, you finally make it to the party the game has been hyping up for the past couple of days. Here you see our crying child protagonist once again being absolutely horrified by his older brother and friends as they pick on him and tease him with the prospect of forcing him to give a kiss to Fredbear due to the child's earlier established fear of animatronics. This prank from the older brother goes absolutely horribly though, as you watch the young child get stuck inside the Fredbear animatronic and watch in horror as the kid gets his head bitten, presumably killing him.
Was that the bite of 87?
This cutscene had a lot of people believing that this was the infamous bite of 87, but that's when Scott decided to throw in some dogshit Easter egg about this bite being set in 1983, and instead of finally giving an answer to a question people have been asking about for the entire series up to this point, and instead of fulfilling the question seemingly being asked in most of the marketing and teasers of this game, Scott decided to write into the series that there was 2 goddamn instances in which someone gets their head bitten off by an animatronic. This would set the standard for some of the dumb bullshit this series would come up with in future games when it comes to lore. This isn't quite the end of the game though, as we still have the 6th, 7th, and 8th hidden night to talk about. So on night 6, you were doing a harder version of night 4 with the 4 main animatronics up to around 4 AM. When you reach this benchmark, you are going to a harder version of night 5 with you facing off against Fredbear. This night isn't too hard if you've gone equipped against both Fredbear and the others up to this point, and so you should get it done in only a few attempts. Beating this gives you a cutscene in which the other animatronic plushies fade away and Fredbear tries to comfort the crying child with the promise of putting him back together. The cutscene ends with a fade to black with a heart rate monitor flatlining. Once you do this, you can throw yourself into the hell that is nightmare mode. Here you are in a slightly different version of night 6, where you once again go against the gauntlet of the original 4 FNAF animatronics until 4 AM. This time, however, you're going against a different animatronic with the name of Nightmare. This dude is a black version of a Nightmare Fredbear who plays almost the exact same, with the primary difference being the dickwad doing a slightly different version of the Fredbear laugh that serves as a fake out on the player. Aside from that, it's the same song and dance as night 6. Beating this mode, however, results in you being plopped in front of a J.J. Abrams style mystery box, with a screen teasing the words, "Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now," while teasing the player with the options of fiddling with the locks on it. This mystery would never be given a solid conclusion. Night 8, or this game's 2020 mode, is unlocked by inputting a code in which you spam 20s on the extras menu. This is the hardest and final variation of the Nightmare mode / Night 6 format, with you going against everyone at their max difficulty. This one is probably the second easiest of the original 4 games, and it really pushes your focus in a fair way. With that out of the way, all I have left in terms of content this game has to offer is the DLC. FNAF 4 was this series' first little foray into the world of free DLC, and with this DLC came some challenges and a bunch of Halloween-themed reskins of all the animatronics outside of the original Nightmare Fredbear. Some of the designs are really lazy in my opinion, like Jacko Bonnie or Jacko Chica, but there's some really standout ones like the Nightmare Marionette or Nightmare Mangle. Nightmare Balloon Boy is pretty cool too, but not much scarier than Plush Trap in my opinion. I actually like how Mangle had an impact on the gameplay, with her static radio sound giving you a signal as to where she was, or if she was active, and the Nightmare Marionette is personally a huge step up from the reskin of Fredbear that was Nightmare. Probably one of the coolest challenges that this game has to offer though was the blind mode. In this challenge you go through Nightmare mode with access to no visual cues aside from jump scares. That means you have no access to what time it is, what you are looking at, and a general sense of direction. This mode forces you to actually learn the mechanics of FNAF 4's audio design, and it's easily one of the most creative and cool things this series has made me do on a gameplay level. Overall, FNAF 4 is a game packed full with some really great and horrifying content that, while really falling flat on its story department, pushed the series back into its roots and improved upon formulas and ideas that Scott had fiddled with for the games up to this point. With this game out of the way, Scott was in the mindset that he was done with the main series of FNAF, and he decided to move on to a different style of the game. This time with some of the most horrific and scary animatronic designs yet.
What the?
FNAF World is an absolute steaming pile of shit that Scott Cawthon and many of the fans regret the existence of. The game is hours upon hours of a seizure-inducing mess filled to the brim with horrible bounce decisions and a visual artistic recession. Let me explain why I have this perspective on this game. FNAF World's announcement came from a slowly developing teaser, which was overtaking the famous thank you image celebrating the release of FNAF 4 and at the time, the conclusion of the FNAF series. Eventually, every character in said image was replaced by a cartoonishly stylized version of themselves, along with an announcement trailer that kinda just made everyone who followed these games extremely confused. Nobody really knew what to make of this game. Some believe this to be a giant troll, which Scott had established himself of doing in the past with a fake-out release of FNAF 3, and some just felt like the game was this really shallow cash-in that nobody really asked for. To nobody's surprise, in hindsight, the game was dog shit on launch. Many things were extremely unintentionally buggy, the game's quality control was kinda shit, and a fair bit of the visuals shown off in the trailer did not match what we got. Luckily for us, Scott Cawthon is an asshole to his community, and so he offered refunds to those who purchased the game on Steam, and took it down until an eventual re-release and update given to the public on GameJolt. This version would update many visual aspects of the game and add an entire mini-campaign along with secrets and some characters, but in my opinion, this all still did not fix a majority of my problems with the game. Let me talk about the aspects of this game that really fail for me. Story-wise, FNAF World is the somewhat meta plot in which you play as the characters of the FNAF series, trying to stop the source of various glitches within the game itself. You go through these different layers of this game by delving deeper into something called the flip side, and finding these ways to clip into further broken tiles, in hopes of progressing further into the mystery and the glitches. Along the way, you can find branching paths that literally only change boss fights and completely rely on if you go and do certain minigames or not. In terms of presence this has throughout the game, you really will not be given a lot of reason to give a shit about any of the deeper story elements, as they really just hinge on your own personal engagement in the lore or story of the other games in the franchise. I think probably the most interesting thing this game does on a plot level is have a face-off with Scott where he artistically tackles a lot of gripes he has with various elements of his fan base and the critics around him, but I kinda wanna leave the discussion around that specific subject for another video. Gameplay-wise, FNAF World is extremely bare bones and cheap feeling. The game has 2 difficulty options, with options for a normal or fixed party. Getting thrown into the overworld, you can access stuff like shops, chests for loot, and the various areas of the game. The overworld visually got a bit of a change from the earlier shitty version of FNAF World, but personally I kind of prefer it as I'm not very fond of the style of Cawthon render art, especially for an entire game. Something else you have to deal with through this entire slog of a journey is the random encounters when traversing said overworld. The encounters and battles of this game are in the ATB style of RPG gameplay, but done absolutely horrendously. There is no gauge to let you know when your characters are ready to fight again, and the amount of white flickering when attacks hit and the obnoxious sound design just make this unbearable to sit through. Generally, the game is super brain dead in terms of balance, and it lacks any sort of engagement from me at least. Probably the most interesting thing that could happen in terms of this battle system is the surprise party member encounters in which you get a new character as a reward for beating them, but even then it loses any hype you may get in the long run for them. The only real sense of depth you'll get out of this game is party customization in the shops, which will allow you to upgrade all your party members in terms of stats, along with purchasing constantly active summons that will add this horrible chaos to this game. I never really played something this much of an enjoyable slog to get through, and it has made me come to appreciate games I found to be boring in this genre ever slightly more. Yeah, it's that bad. Oh, but the torture of this game doesn't quite end here, because Scott tried to do the funny, haha, I'm self-aware meme in this game with the DLC, and it just results in these really bare-bone minigames with a sense of snarkiness through most of them. Probably the only thing slightly interesting this game does on a surface level is tease the next game, FNAF Sister Location, but the stuff in this expansion just drove me and my friends insane. This game looks like shit. What the
I literally do not give a fuck. I watch American play FNAF World.
Watching an alien pig.
I'm watching American play FNAF World, okay?
Father, get the fuck out of my room. I'm playing FNAF World.
Very cash money.
Very cash money. Do you know it isn't cash money?
FNAF World. It's the FNAF World. Yabba dabba dabba doo ba dee. FNAF World is my favorite Flintstones. Honestly.
It's up there with Pebbles.
Also, if any of this audio makes it into the video, I just want to clarify that I fucking hate FNAF and everything it stands for.
I mostly.
I feel it absolutely necessary to mention this because some fucker is gonna get up my ass about it. I already know this for a fact because I know that fucker personally, and I will. Joshua, if you're seeing this, I will fucking kill you. You will not survive.
Dude, the V-Sync on this game is such ass. You see that? Like, you move ever so slightly up. Oh boy. Oh my god, there's so many fucking lights.
You need to do the speedrun spreads where you just beat the game in 12 minutes and then never think about it ever again.
I'm gonna fucking shoot myself.
Freddy in space.
Honestly, this is probably the best FNAF game, unironically, because it's actually different. You think Scott thought this was funny? FNAF fans, when I tell them that I don't think Poopy Fuzzy was a scary character.
No, Poopy Fuzzy is my favorite. Overall, FNAF World is some of the trashiest of trash when it comes to what the series has to offer, but it very much helped the future games in terms of how Scott did quality control with the games. I find a lot of what Scott gained from this, and what he is expressing creatively around this time, to be some of the most interesting discussion around this mediocre and meddling garbage, but I think it's time we move on to some of the more fondly remembered games of the series and see where Scott took it from here, because yeah, the series just won't let itself die. Sister Location is probably one of my favorite games from the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. The lead up to this game was a bit of a confusing ride, with plenty of twists and turns along the way. There was this entire build up to the title of the game, with many not even knowing if this would be a FNAF game. Once the name Sister Location dropped and we started getting these crazy renders of these clownish robotic characters we have never seen before, people were even more split on what all this meant and how it would even fit into the FNAF franchise. The big aha moment for most fans was the drop of the trailer, along with some copyright registration leaks revealing some more familiar names coming back in a new form. This game actually took a fair bit longer than the other games to be released, and it even got to the point of scaring people into thinking the project got cancelled at some point. The reason for the extended development time, and what this game truly was, would finally start to make sense to the public with the release of possibly one of the most ambitious FNAF games Scott has ever made. Sister Location is a really interesting game in the FNAF franchise due to its departure from a somewhat, at the time, stale formula that the series was known for. Instead of the traditional goal of surviving 5 nights in a single location and fighting off animatronics until 6 AM, this game was a more objective-based point-and-click adventure-style approach to the gameplay with a larger focus on storytelling. Since this game doesn't have a general gameplay loop like the other Five Nights at Freddy's games, we will instead be analyzing the experience of this game night by night. Sister Location opens up with a panning up shot of the mascot animatronic baby with a bit of dialogue between an animatronic designer and another person with presumably more authority in the situation. The designer is questioning a lot of design details within the animatronic, and in a very sly and interesting way, the designer avoids the questions only to be more directly confronted by the mysterious man. At the end of this, we get the name drop of what the community knew at the time as the name of the child murder and Freddy's co-owner in the FNAF novel trilogy, William Afton, and thus we finally now have the name for the famous purple guy in the series. After going through the title screen, you find yourself going down a really deep elevator shaft in the science fiction-esque laboratory. Aesthetically speaking, a lot of people seem to have a problem with the direction Scott took this game, as I've heard a fair bit of people say it was hard for them to suspend their disbelief when it comes to something like this existing within the more grounded world of FNAF. But personally speaking, I think the series lost me that aspect the moment we got into serial killer robot bunnies. I think it was really cool Scott wasn't afraid to explore more aesthetics he has a past in, and obviously had a huge passion for, so it's something I really admire about the game. The amount of interactivity with the little buttons or objects in the various rooms is fun and keeps people constantly clicking around and appreciating the effort put into the more quality environments of this game. During this little intro elevator segment though, we are given probably one of the more interesting additions of the series, voice acting. Scott really takes advantage of the stuff he could do with voice work in this game, and honestly when it comes to dialogue, he could write some pretty funny and engaging stuff. I very much enjoyed the gags with the hand unit announcer voice throughout the game, and there's some really interesting and unsettling stuff these things you're in this bunker with say throughout the game that fleshes out and grants this more out there setting. Once you arrive in the actual bunker, which we are informed of being owned by a sister location of Freddy's called Circus Babies, we are introduced to these controls in which we can shock animatronics back to their stage and check on them for maintenance. Everything seems like it's going really well throughout this first night, with you crawling through vents and having no problem with animatronics really. Finishing the night as you're sitting on your ass, eating a popcorn, and watching some horrible animatic sitcom with some lore implications as you move on to night 2. Night 2 is when shit starts to hit the fan, with you going through the vents, dealing with the glitchy hand unit voices, and having problems keeping animatronics in their respective zones. When you leave the main control module to the Circus Baby control panel, the power goes out and you start hearing alerts about something coming through the vents. Here you are given an escape plan from the situation by the animatronic Circus Baby, with her giving you advice on hiding under the control panel and holding this little slidey door shut while these fucked up little baby creatures called Bitty Babs try to get you. I like how thrown onto this whole situation you are, and enjoy the fact that you as the player are panicking to keep this little damn door shut with no consensus on what is supposed to happen or what could happen. It's this fresh type of horror the game takes on, with it constantly leaving you guessing as to what could happen next. It's the fear of the unknown that really helps sell the entire concept of this entire game, and it makes this one of the scariest in the series. Moving on from this, you're given a heads up from Circus Baby with her warning about what to do in Ballora Gallery, since she knows the hand unit is just gonna send you there anyway. Just like she warned you, in a surprisingly nice gesture, you were sent into the Ballora Gallery to go fix a generator in the breaking room. The Ballora section actually has you moving forward consistently, with you needing to stop whenever Ballora gets close so she doesn't bump into you. This is a really tense and quiet little segment that has Scott really pushing himself visually with the whole fake 3D effect the series does in a 2D engine. It's honestly admirable that we were able to go from some dog shit on the level of FNAF World only to be greeted by some really impressive work here on this game. It just shows the amount of potential and talent Scott has when he takes his time to make a good quality product. Moving on to the breaker room, you're thrown into a situation in which you have to charge up these power percentage buttons on this tablet while luring Freddy away from you with this little voice of a puppet named Bon Bon. This is honestly one of the weaker segments within this game in my opinion, and it's a bit tedious, but at least it doesn't overstay its welcome for too long. Once you're done with that, you run the fuck back into the main control unit room, pack your shit, and go home for the night. For some reason, the crack fiend you play as decides to go back for a third night, with stuff falling apart and getting worse for you after night 2. Checking on the animatronics on your left and right this time results in you seeing this weirdly mutilated Ballora in the spotlight on your left, and you being forced to enter into the Funtime Auditorium on the right. This area gameplay-wise plays very similar to the Ballora Gallery, but with the threat being Funtime and Foxy, and your main tool being this flash beacon. You will need to get to the door in the back by flashing your light and seeing where Foxy is in the room. If you move while they get too close to you, it will result in a game over. Once you make it into the door at the end, you'll be thrown into a parts and service segment with Funtime Freddy, where you will be forced to perform maintenance on the animatronic. I absolutely adore the concept of a segment like this existing in the series due to the established uncontrolled nature of these things and how it would be something someone in the universe would have to do. It takes the idea of a game of operation and flips it on its head in this sadistic way where at any point this fucker could just come alive and absolutely murder you. This iteration of the concept in this game has you following the exact directions of the hand unit voice by pressing these buttons in the specific spots on the animatronic. There's actually this cool little fake out moment where the animatronic shell opens up in this quick and frightening manner. It's one of the few jump scares I feel wasn't cheap in the series. Around this point in the maintenance segment, you run into an issue with the Bon Bon hand puppet as it's needed to press the button on the little shit's bow tie, but he's running around the place making you have to catch him off guard. The best way to do this is to have him slowly come out more and more in terms of visibility without directly shining the light on him. This makes it so you can try to out-reflex him and press the button on his bow tie. Being this allows you to move on to the fourth and most arguably frustrating night. Night 4 has you being kidnapped by the animatronics and thrown into an unknown spring lock suit. Gameplay wise, what you're going to need to do for the entirety of this 4th night is try to strike this really difficult balance of shaking off these little horrific ballerina puppets called minarinas, while also tightening these spring locks all through the entire suit's head. This, while being relatively simple in concept, is extremely difficult to do due to the RNG factor of the minarinas and the ticking timer of the spring locks not being balanced in a way that makes the gameplay enjoyable in any way. There are some genuinely cool and creepy visuals and the lore implications with this night, but overall, I think this is easily the weakest of the 5 nights in the campaign. In fact, this night was so rough on launch in terms of balance that it is one of the few times Scott had to patch and rebalance something in the core gameplay of a Five Nights at Freddy's game. Night 5 has a somewhat dark intro to it, with you finding 2 hung corpses on the stages you normally check on. It's a pretty unsettling moment, but the hand unit announcer moves on pretty quickly to having you go into the Funtime Auditorium again to do maintenance on just another animatronic. This time around, you can just make a run for the end, so there isn't much need to stop. When you make it into the parts and service this time though, you're greeted by the soulless husk of Baby. Hand unit instructs you to look into why she was mysteriously deactivated, only to immediately be cut off by the soft-spoken voice of Baby. This time she will be helping you with the process of doing maintenance on her, giving you the heads up on failure resulting in her unwillingly committing your murder. During this, she will give you a code to input on a keypad inside of her head and instructs you in taking a part out of her left arm. After this, Baby will lead you through a dark room while giving you a warning about an animatronic coming for you. You will need to follow her instructions or else you will run right into an animatronic and be killed on the spot. Once you make it to the destination, you'll be greeted with the presence of the scooping room with no escape possible. Baby then reveals to us what her plan was throughout the entire game, with her betraying you and telling you about how the animatronics were taken apart one by one to create this amalgamation called Ennard. Their main goal being to get you into the scooping room to have you forcefully ripped apart from the inside so they could wear you as a skin suit and escape to the surface world with a wider population. This night then ends with that exact scenario playing out and you seeing the shadow of yourself with these glowing eyes in the mirror. Funnily enough, and as a piece of trivia, the shadow here is actually a cutout of Rick Astley from his famous Never Gonna Give You Up video. This ending isn't all the game has to offer though, as Sister Location, a lot like FNAF 3 in World, has alternate endings with questionable canon implications. To get this ending, you will have to complete a mini-game that you can replay on the extras menu or receive upon death, in which you play as Baby giving cupcakes to children. To complete this and unlock access to the alternate ending of this game, you'll need to feed absolutely every single child here and take an extremely optimized route. This can be very frustrating to do, but it's a welcome challenge in my opinion. Once you reach the end of this mini-game after feeding the children, you will need to grab an ice cream cone and make a mad dash for the beginning, in which you're greeted with a cutscene showing Baby luring a young girl to her and forcefully clawing her inside of her stomach hatch, thus killing her. It's earlier implied that this girl's the daughter of our killer William Afton, who we heard wanting to go play with the animatronics, but was constantly being told no by him. Moving on from less lore-oriented stuff, we gain a keycard from this minigame's completion that gives us access to the secret room during the part of Night 5 where Baby helps you avoid the animatronic in the dark. Instead of following her directions here, you can rather go and run to your right, which allows you to access this room full of cameras and doors. Here you are put into a 1v1 traditional FNAF style segment where you need to maintain a very low amount of power while fighting off the animatronic Ennard. This is a really tough final boss fight which requires you to listen on sound cues and react accordingly in a very exact way. I enjoyed the mix of various elements from FNAF 1 and 4 here and think it serves as this nice little cherry on top of what would otherwise be an already quality and fun FNAF experience. Beating this gives you a cutscene with some butter and a vampire soap opera from the earlier established nights, and with that we have finished the base experience of Sister Location. This wasn't exactly the end of the game for Scott though, as he almost immediately got to work on what would become Sister Location's custom night DLC, which we would talk about now. The lead up and stuff around this update is pretty interesting in my opinion. Scott's websites, FNAFworld.com and ScottGames.com, were having an argument between themselves in the source code of the two sites, talking about a group of figures ejecting and throwing at the sentient part of them, with said ejected part at the end implying that it was going to put itself back together. The lore implications of what this meant wouldn't fully make sense until later though, and we will talk about that more thoroughly later in this and the next video. The gameplay of Sister Location Custom Night plays very similarly to the alternate end sequence of Sister Location, in which you have to deal with the funtime animatronics instead of Ennard. The main difference in terms of actual gameplay functions between the two is probably the audio cues being completely different and the controlled shock mechanic, which resets specific animatronics so that you can have more freedom when thrown into more tight situations with the RNG or to scare off the mini arenas. There's also this other animatronic who hits you with a meme screen for a bit, which removes all your abilities to interact with stuff in your office. You'll need to type out the letters LOL to get rid of this screen. The main objective of this entire DLC is to survive until 6 AM through this various FNAF 2 style custom night challenges and be rewarded with various cutscenes showing a man slowly rotting away as he walks out of his house every day, eventually peeking at this giant blob of mechanical eyes and such that we can only presume to be Ennard. These sets of challenges are probably some of the hardest the series has thrown at its fans so far and definitely pushed me to an extent in a way very few of the challenges so far have done. The most interesting bit to come out of this DLC is the end cutscene in which the voice of someone named Michael talks to his father, who is revealed to be Springtrap or William Afton, implying that he was going to go out of his way to find William. This DLC's main rotting cutscene also gave me one of my favorite videos to come out of the community response for this series that I think most people need to see.
Hey, so look, bro, I'm in the crib bored, nigga, and I don't know why, but this cutscene from one of the Five Nights at Freddy games popped in my head, bro. This is the purple guy's son, right? This the purple guy's son. And he got entered inside of him, dog. And this is just so funny to me because this scene's so funny. Look, he walking down the street, all his neighbors outside waving to his ass. What's up, Mike? What's up, Michael? Hey, you going to work? Oh, it's lit. You feel me? Look, the next day, right? He's still looking smooth. He like, all right, you feel me? About to go do my shit, you know what I'm saying? He crib walking out the crib, you feel me? He hitting them C's on that motherfucker. Them niggas was like, yo, my nigga Mike. Big Mike, hey, you feel me? Then look, the next day, right? The next day, he looks a little green. And my nigga, the first nigga on the block, like, wait a minute. The first nigga on the block, like, wait a minute. Everybody else, like, okay, he look a little fucked up, but I mean, you know, he probably just a little sick. He might got the flu or something, you know what I mean? Next day, right? Next day, look. This nigga come out the crib even greener. My man's is like, nah, that other nigga had a point. You see, my man didn't even come outside. The first nigga that peeped, he was like, wait a minute, no, this nigga not right. I ain't coming out there to say hi to that nigga today. You see? And then look at this nigga, he's like, wait a minute, the green shirt nigga's got a point. Look, next day, oh my god. This nigga is even more fucked up. You see, half the block is still in the crib. Half the block is still in their house, bro. All the niggas that came outside, like, wait a minute, bro. This nigga, I think he got the Rona or something. He needs to get sense in the crib. Look, next day. This nigga full purple, nigga. My man's is so scared, he behind the crib. He in the backyard looking over like, damn.
Overall, FNAF Sister Location is one of the more memorable and artistically creative games to come out of Scott with the FNAF series, and obviously pushed him in a way that he went all in on art direction, voice direction, and music direction. It's probably one of the few games that nails what it's going for on a presentation level and showed a level of experimentation the series desperately needed at this point. Little did everyone know, Scott would go into hiding for a fairly long time with the next entry, and he would slowly get ready for one of his coolest misdirections and surprise drops of this entire series. Pizza Simulator, up to its launch, was this game that seemingly was announced out of nowhere as this tone-deaf, almost FNAF World-style move by Scott, where he showed interest in doing a simulator tycoon game around the series. The teasers and screenshots up to the game's release were purely just these minimal shots where we got very little information on what this was all gonna play like. Everyone didn't really expect much out of the game lore-wise due to Scott always talking down the game as being this in-between game with something a lot bigger on the horizon. But little did we know, he was dropping hints through all of this with a teaser image and animatronic reveal in a book way before the public's knowledge about a pizza simulator. All of this misleading and build up for what many thought was going to be another FNAF World situation turned out to actually be a Metal Gear Solid 2 Snake to Raiden and Protect Switch style subversion of expectations. Let's analyze the experience of this game real quick. The game opens up with this very surface level pizza topping screen, with it giving this opening impression to the player that there will be a lot of customization akin to something like a roller coaster tycoon game. Stuff gets a bit confusing to the player though when you actually start the main game and are forced to basically play this little shooter where you spam pizzas into kids' mouths. How or why this feeds into the whole tycoon veil of the grand scheme of things, I have no clue, but it's simple enough of an intro to divert the expectations of the player usually, so why complain? Eventually, the game will start to glitch out, with this black Freddy appearing, and you'll be booted into this more traditional FNAF looking screen, with the game plopping you right in front of this fucked up horrific version of Baby, while putting pressure on you with an audio check segment, where you'll fill out a paper while these admittedly disturbing and off-putting sounds play. There's this shitty instructor throughout all of this telling you about these plans and documents you have no context for whatsoever, and the scene kind of puts you in a scenario akin to being plopped in front of a ticking time bomb. Eventually, around the 4th time around of listening in on the noises, the tape gets interrupted and you hear and see Baby move. After this scene, you watch a training tape for becoming a Freddy's franchisee, and then begin a basic tutorial for the Tycoon Simulator segments. This is around when the utter confusion kicks in for the player generally, because now you've been swapped from what you thought was a Tycoon shooter game, to a horror interrogation style scene, to a comedic cutscene with an actual Tycoon game. Generally, you'll probably mess around with the simple money spending system here, and maybe take an offer or two from advertisers to spend money on pimping your store out. You can discover the use of play tokens by playing one of the mini games here, and up some Faz rating that gives you even more money. Stuff seems pretty surface level, chill, and childish fun. That is until you hit the finish button on the bottom right corner of the screen, and you have your expectations once again flipped on you as you were thrown into a traditional FNAF office style segment, with you attempting to complete a list of tasks and move on with your life. The ambient and systems are a confusing mishmash of many ideas from FNAF 3, but somehow a bit more tedious. You won't really have to worry about a majority of them for the first night though, as there is no threat in these events that surround you. Well, at least not yet. What you should pick up from this night generally is instead of the time system that has been a thing in most traditional gameplay in the series, you will now have a list of glorified loading screens you'll now have to wait for the completion of to end the night. Yeah, really, trust me, the gameplay will get worse though. Finishing the night puts you through another capitalism parody cutscene, followed up by another interrogation scene that you can this time complete. You are given the option at the beginning of the interrogation if you want to go through doing this minigame, with the reward of doing it being a huge sum of money, along with an effect on which ending branch you will take, and a shift in office gameplay in later nights. After this, you may see a screen depending on the liability of the items you bought during the Tycoon segment before the night. Here you will have to waste money due to bad spending on your own behalf, in hopes of either paying off or winning lawsuits. This entire system here creates some strategy to structuring your Tycoon as the nights go along to avoid bankruptcy so you can do the other endings. After this, Night 2 really establishes what this game is all about in terms of gameplay loop in a pretty smart way. Depending on if you decide to salvage Molten Freddy the previous night during the interrogation, you will be faced with him throughout the night as a traditional FNAF enemy. In terms of systems to ward him off, you can use the audio alerts and motion detectors to find out where he is on the map, while you can try to keep him away as long as possible while you get your task done. If he shows up by your event, keep your light on either your left or right, depending on where you hear a noise, and he will eventually go away, and you can lure him far enough to make progress on your task via the audio alert screen. You will also have to strike a balance between this and management of the fan, which often lures animatronics towards you and makes it a lot harder to hear the subtle audio cues. The system, in terms of them showing up if you salvage them, and how they work, applies to literally every animatronic that shows up during the salvage, and in my opinion, this is really boring. The lack of distinction outside of audio cues is some of the most lazy shit Scott has ever done in terms of the core FNAF gameplay in this series, and to be completely honest, there should have been more time put into this. The general hostile animatronic designs in this game are kind of mixed too, with there being some really cool ideas here and there, but there being a distinct lack of visual polish. Take for example the infamous redesign of Springtrap in this game called Scrap Trap. This dude looks like a clusterfuck of clipping meshes and blocky texturing that makes him extremely unappealing on a visual design front. Contrast this with the quality work done on characters like Scrap Baby, who have this roughly put together yet distinct and unsettling design that makes for a good villain. Or take for example the subtle puppet elements within the animatronic Lefty that ties into the lore and has this extremely cool trap for an animatronic concept behind it. It's a weird mix of Scott putting a lot of thought and effort into some characters while dropping the ball on others. Problems with the presentation aside though, I really enjoy the concept of this game and how many of the challenges in it are self-made, with you aiming for different goals. Your choices through spending money, keeping animatronics, accepting sponsorships, and playing different mini games or doing Easter eggs completely changes the experience of what ending you're gonna get, what gameplay you will go through the various nights, and what you will do during the tycoon modes. I have to admit the amount of content in this game is pretty damn insane. The most important aspect of this game in my opinion though is easily the focus on narrative and tying up loose threads from the rest of the series. This is that grand finale FNAF 4 could only dream of being, and it does this really flawlessly in its presentation. There isn't some stupid retconning of bites and shit. There isn't some dumb story element that changes the series. This is the finale of the plotline around many years of murders and horror, and it does it really well. The gist of what happens in this game plot-wise is pretty simple. You are playing as Michael Afton, who's being instructed by an older individual named Henry with a history around Freddys through a series of tapes being left for him. You as Michael are setting up this huge Freddys location for about a week in hopes of finding various specific animatronics in the alleyway and putting them into the vents. The goal is to get absolutely everyone together so you can help Henry set up this big ass trap in which a fire is started within the Freddys with no means of an escape for all of the animatronics along with yourself to prevent further hauntings and incidents around the murders. The game canonically ends with this really raw speech delivered by Henry in which he reveals the trap to everyone including Michael and brings everything to the ground.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume, although you have indeed been called. You have all been called here, into a labyrinth of sounds and smells, misdirection and misfortune. A labyrinth with no exit, a maze with no prize. You don't even realize that you are trapped. Your lust for blood has driven you in endless circles, chasing the cries of children in some unseen chamber, always seeming so near, yet somehow out of reach. But you will never find them. None of you will. This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. I am remaining as well. I am nearby. This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of every tragedy should. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms the way you lifted others into yours. And then, what became of you? I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter. I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest, for you and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication.
It's this really satisfying wrap up to the FNAF series and ended almost everything somewhat explained. The voice acting is top notch here, and it makes everything simple enough to make shit not irritating for the future. I'll have a fair bit more to say here again in the upcoming second part of the series with all the lore, but for now, I think it's time to move on to the grand finale of the Cawthon developed games of FNAF, and probably the game that left the longest term impact on me, for better or for worse. Ultimate Custom Night originally was meant to be free DLC for Pizza Simulator, designed to give the game extra content akin to what Scott did with Sister Location, but later was revealed and released as this all-encompassing celebration of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Scott marketed it as this epic Smash Bros. Scaled crossover event in which you could customize and basically make your own traditional FNAF game. You want Springtrap and Nightmare Bonnie to come at you? Go for it. You want to have a 1v1 with an animatronic on max difficulty? Go for it. This game has so much opportunity for content and concept, and in my humble opinion, the game nails it. I don't really have much to talk about in terms of build up to this game or interesting lore bits teased compared to the previous games either, so straight into the game we go. Gameplay wise, I have a fair bit to cover in terms of mechanics if you can't tell by a glance at this screen. In this game, we have 3 different camera systems, with there being 8 main cameras, 3 cameras within cameras, and Cam 8, I shit you not, a vent screen, and an air duct system. Here on the main camera system, you can look out for animatronics that appear on your left and right doors, along with an entire extremely simple mini FNAF segment on Toy Freddy's screen for the meme trash animatronics. There is also an entire shop system within this screen, in which you can check on camera 7, where by clicking these Faz coins scattered throughout the various visuals of this game, you could purchase plushies that ward off Nightmare Bonnie, Nightmare Mangle, and Circus Baby. Most importantly, you could purchase something called a death coin, in which you're given the ability to delete an animatronic from your night without taking away from your score, which is almost essential for beating the hardest challenge in this series. The vent and duct cams are basically the same system on different tabs. The vent cam has 2 ducts, with one of which being able to be closed. Through this screen, you have 3 nodes you can click on, with there being a snare to keep animatronics out. It's security on top of security to make your life against literally a little over 50 fuckers with a limited supply of energy fairly easier. The duct cams work exactly like the Pizza Sim cams in terms of how audio lures work, but with the added benefit of a switch that could close another one of the 2 vent doors. Both cams have animatronics that completely bypass these doors, which we will talk about more later. On the number keys 1 through 6, or on the monitor next to the cam options, you're able to choose what effect you want to be active throughout the night. These effects being a silent ventilation button, a power generator which helps the player conserve power, a heater that keeps certain animatronics back while upping the temperature, a power AC to decrease the office temperature to keep away other more heat-sensitive animatronics, and a global music box that automatically winds up the music box on one of the cams to keep certain animatronics at bay, with the caveat of this draining the player's power real fast. I know this is a lot and I'm going pretty fast, but there's a lot to cover, so let's move on to the office and main UI. In the main office, you will have 2 doors on your left and right side, a vent on the wall in the upper center, a vent next to the right door, a camera system button, and a Freddy Fazbear head button ripped straight out of FNAF 2. On the bottom left, there is a power gauge and a new noise meter that you will need to be extremely aware of for noise-sensitive animatronics. On the bottom right, there is a heat meter to be aware of for heat-sensitive animatronics, which is how you keep track of the AC and heater mechanic from earlier. Traditionally, the temperature starts at 60 degrees and goes up to 120 degrees. Warning signs by the monitor button will pop up and indicate that you must reset the ventilation by pressing the reset vent button on the bottom right of the monitor screen. Aside from this, there is some animatronic specific stuff that you need to look out for, such as the Old Man Consequences minigame, the Night Marionette that will fade in and out of your office screen constantly, with him killing you if you spend too long on him, and much more. Literally, I could talk for hours about specific and different situations all 50 animatronics put you through, but then I would have to worry about the additional hidden animatronics that this little fucko comes in and drops in the game randomly, so I'm just going to save you guys' time by summarizing my experience with this game. This game, on an objective level, has a list of different tasks and challenges for you to do, with them getting more and more difficult as you go along. These are all baby shit though, and purely serve the same purpose as a training mode in a traditional fighting game. That being to get you ready for the real deal. With the real deal in this case probably being one of the most grueling and horrific tasks I've ever put myself through. This game is actual mental torture that should be studied by the fucking CIA, and yes, I finished it. I spent 7 days straight just putting myself through pain I cannot begin to describe. This game nearly put me into a mental crisis, making me question the morals behind what I do for reviews. Was this all worth it? Was these 64 pages of completed FNAF about to come to an end over an asset flip hellhole created by some Christian in Texas? Well, I got my answer in the end, excluding that last question, and that answer was yes. Oh my god! Holy shit! That took like a fucking week! Oh my god! What the fuck? Fuck this game! Fuck this game! Man, I don't care. Just get the shit off my screen now. This isn't all to the game though. In fact, this game is pretty damn important to the future of FNAF, as this truly was the end of Cawthon's work on the games of the series and the passing of the torch to a newer, larger developer team for future games. This game would set up a fair bit of lore in those ones. The strange caveat of all this being that most of the lore introduced was through extremely vague and strange visual novel scenes depicting a samurai Freddy and Foxy having this rivalry and a weird Chica schizo yandere story. No, really. It's most definitely one of the stranger parts of the lore, with all these bits of voice acting telling stories and having different angles and vocal details to their characters, and it's extremely admirable that all this effort was put in, which we will indulge ourselves in the next video. But with all this covered, I think it's time we move on from this game and talk about what happened after. With the release of Ultimate Custom Night, Scott Cawthon announced that he'd be putting his focus into stuff like books, the movie based on this series, and a VR project produced by indie studio Steelwool. Scott Cawthon would later, after some controversy, distance himself from the FNAF franchise for the comfort of the community around it, and so that other creative voices could have even more power within the franchise. Even though Scott isn't completely gone from creatively steering this whole series, there's something extremely special about the original Click Team games. The restrictions on the engine and art style Scott developed from his way of modeling and rendering give the game Scott developed this somewhat distinct feeling almost no fan game has really been able to capture. The way Scott approached the storytelling and marketing of this games with teaser images along with these somewhat child-friendly designs made this game reach this kind of success that would become super influential for the better or for worse when it comes to how horror developers would do character design or market their stuff. This series is definitely one of the most influential modern day horror series in all of media, and while it has fundamental flaws in the horror aspects such as the jump scares or mixed bag of story, the original FNAF games will forever be in the minds of horror game enthusiasts for years to come. But I am not quite done with these games. Far from it actually, if you couldn't tell by me avoiding talking about the lore, the many novels to come out around the various releases. This franchise is extremely complex and somewhat intriguing with the amount of content and various artistic routes Cawthon, along with his collaborators, went. Some of which actually tied it into this web of various timelines and overlapping story points that would feed into the various narratives around the fictional Freddy's locations and characters. This is what we will be covering in the next and second part of the Five Nights at Freddy's analysis series. But until then, I am Sleep. Thank you for sticking around for easily one of my most ambitious projects I've ever covered on this channel. Check out the next part if it interests you, and leave some support on my channel through a like, subscription, or comment. It really goes a long way, and please take care. See ya!